My mortgage appointment was 2 days away when I opened my savings account and found my $18,000 gone. The transfer receipt pointed to an old emergency account that still listed my father as an authorized signer. I called him expecting panic. Instead, he said, "Kayla family doesn't keep score." Seconds later, my sister Hannah posted photos from her lavish wedding venue. Before I could make sense of any of it, a fraud investigator from my bank called and whispered Ms. Bishop the account records tell a very different story. If you're watching from outside the US, tell me your country and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where everyone is joining from. And if you enjoy stories about family justice and standing up for yourself, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and come along for this journey. Monday morning arrived with a kind of silence that only follows a sleepless weekend. I had barely closed my eyes since discovering that my savings account had been emptied. Every time I managed to drift off, I'd wake up convinced there had been some mistake that I'd log into my banking app and find the money sitting exactly where it had always been. Instead, every refresh showed the same number, 482,007. That was all that remained after 6 years of saving. I canceled my lunch plans, called in late to work, and drove downtown to meet Grace Whitmore, the fraud investigator who had phoned me Saturday afternoon. The regional office occupied the 5th floor of a brick building overlooking the Chicago River. It wasn't the kind of place people visited unless something had already gone terribly wrong. Grace greeted me in the lobby. She looked exactly like she had sounded over the phone, calm, composed, and careful with every word. "Ms. Bishop, Kayla is fine." She smiled politely. "I'm Grace. Thank you for coming in." She led me into a small conference room instead of one of the teller offices. A folder already sat on the table beside a laptop. "I know this has been a stressful weekend," she began. "Before we discuss what we found, I need to explain how this account was originally structured." I nodded. I honestly don't remember much about it. Grace opened the folder. "According to our records, this emergency account was opened 9 years ago. That sounded right." "My mom had surgery," I said. "Dad suggested opening a shared emergency account in case something unexpected happened. I was just starting my career." Grace confirmed the paperwork. "You were the primary owner? And my father? He was added as an authorized signer." I frowned. I thought that ended years ago. A lot of people assume that Grace replied, but account authority doesn't expire automatically. Unless paperwork is filed removing an authorized signer, the authorization remains active. I leaned back in my chair. So legally, he still had authority to approve certain transactions. My stomach tightened. Authority, not permission. Those 2 words were about to become the center of my life. Grace seemed to recognize exactly what I was thinking. "Having access isn't the same as having consent," she said gently. "Those are very different issues." That sentence was the first thing anyone had said all weekend that made me feel seen, because everyone in my family kept acting as though one erased the other. Grace turned her laptop toward me. I reviewed every activity on the account during the last month. A timeline appeared on the screen. Every login, every password change, every verification request, every confirmation. Most of the month looked ordinary. Then 4 days before the transfer, everything changed. "There." She pointed to an unfamiliar login. "Does that device belong to you? No. What about this one? Another login? No." She zoomed in. These activities all occurred within 48 hours before the transfer. I studied the timestamps. Friday evening, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. It looked deliberate, not rushed, planned. "I never logged in those days," I said. "I know." Grace clicked again. This is where things become unusual. A verification code had been requested. Then another. Then the transfer authorization appeared. If my father approved it, I asked slowly, Why did you tell me the records didn't match my family's explanation? Grace folded her hands. Because someone told our customer service department that your father completed the online transaction himself. But he didn't. She shook her head. The records don't support that. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What do they support? Grace hesitated for just a second. The login behavior doesn't resemble someone unfamiliar with mobile banking. I almost laughed. My father still prints directions from MapQuest. Grace smiled. I wasn't going to say that. She opened another document. The device used during authentication was a modern smartphone running the newest operating system. That alone didn't prove anything. Lots of people upgraded phones, but not my father. He had owned the same phone for almost 6 years and complained every time it installed an update. Can you identify whose phone it was not yet? She emphasized the last 2 words, but we can say with confidence that it wasn't the device your father normally uses. A strange feeling settled over me. Not relief, not satisfaction, something heavier. If Dad hadn't completed the transfer himself, then someone else had. Someone who understood enough about the account to guide the entire process. Grace continued. We're requesting additional authentication logs. What will they show? Potentially the device history, security verification path, and login metadata. I recognize the terminology from my own work. As a financial compliance analyst, I spent my days reviewing audit trails and documentation. Evidence mattered. Assumptions didn't. For the first time since Saturday, I stopped thinking like a daughter. I started thinking like an investigator. If someone intentionally used Dad's authorization, I said, then the timeline becomes very important, Grace finished. Exactly. Every minute, every click, every message, every approval. I looked back at the printed transfer receipt I'd carried in my purse all weekend. Saturday, 11:18 a.m. That was only 20 minutes before Hannah had posted photos from a bridal boutique. I hadn't noticed the timing before. Now I couldn't stop staring at it. Grace noticed too. Interesting, I think so. What is it? My sister uploaded wedding photos less than half an hour after the transfer. Grace didn't react. She simply wrote something in her notebook. Professional, careful, objective. It reminded me that facts speak much louder than accusations. She closed the folder. My advice, I waited. Don't confront anyone until you've gathered more information. I almost smiled. Too late. She raised an eyebrow. I already asked my father where the money went, and he said, family doesn't keep score. Grace was quiet for several seconds. Finally, she said, sometimes families confuse trust with unrestricted access. That sentence stayed with me long after I left the building. Outside Chicago buzzed with its usual Monday morning rhythm. People hurried toward offices. Tour boats drifted along the river. Coffee shops overflowed with conversations about meetings, deadlines, vacations. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of my family had begun to shift. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. It wasn't Hannah. It wasn't my father. It was a calendar reminder. Sunday family dinner. I stared at it for nearly a minute. Then I pressed Keep Event. If answers existed, they weren't sitting inside bank records anymore. They were sitting around my parents' dining room table. And for the first time in my life, I intended to ask questions that nobody would be able to dismiss with family doesn't keep score. I almost canceled Sunday dinner 3 different times. Every instinct told me to stay home, lock my apartment doorster, and let Melissa Carter, the attorney whose name Grace had recommended, handle everything from that point forward. But another part of me knew something else. For years, my family had relied on conversations that disappeared as soon as they ended. Feelings replaced facts. Memories shifted depending on who was telling the story. If I wanted to understand what had really happened, I needed to hear everyone's version before anyone had time to coordinate it. So I drove to my parents' house anyway. The familiar brick colonial looked exactly the way it always had. My mother's flower beds were perfectly maintained. The porch light was already on. A casserole cooled on the kitchen counter. Everything about the house suggested an ordinary family gathering. Only my family knew it wasn't. Mom opened the door before I reached the bell. "Oh, sweetheart." She hugged me a little longer than usual. "You look tired. I haven't been sleeping much." She lowered her eyes. "I know." That answer caught my attention. Not "I'm sorry," not "what happened." Just "I know." Dad was already setting plates on the dining room table. "Hey, Kayla." His voice sounded almost cheerful, as though we'd spoken yesterday instead of ending our last conversation with him telling me family didn't keep score. Hannah walked in from the kitchen carrying a bowl of salad. She looked radiant, fresh manicure, diamond earrings I'd never seen before, a white sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She smiled. There she is. I looked at her for several seconds before speaking. "You've been busy." She laughed. "Wedding planning never stops." Noah Bennett arrived a few minutes later carrying dessert from a local bakery. He greeted everyone warmly before giving me a quick hug. "I'm glad you made it." His smile faded as he looked between me and Hannah. Something about the room already felt wrong to him. Dinner began with small talk. Dad discussed baseball. Mom asked about work. Hannah talked about floral arrangements and seating charts. I barely touched my food. Finally, I placed my fork on the table. "I want to talk about the $18,000. The room became perfectly still. Mom stared at her plate. Dad folded his napkin. Hannah sighed dramatically. I knew this was coming. No one asked what I meant. No one looked surprised. That told me more than any confession could have. I kept my voice steady. The money that disappeared from my savings account. Dad spoke first. "Kayla, we've already discussed this." "No," I replied. "You gave me one sentence. That's not a discussion." He leaned back. "You've always been responsible." "I don't understand what that has to do with anything." "You were in a position to help." I blinked. Help Hannah needed support. I looked directly at my sister. "You took my house fund." She didn't deny it. Instead, she crossed her arms. "I borrowed it. You never asked. I knew you'd say no." Her answer landed harder than I expected, not because it was cruel, because she said it as though it were completely reasonable. Dad nodded. "Exactly." I turned toward him. "Exactly what you would have refused, because it wasn't my responsibility." He sighed. "That's what I mean about keeping score." I could feel my heartbeat rising, but I refused to raise my voice. "Dad, I saved that money for 6 years, and you're still young enough to save again." I stared at him. He had spent decades teaching high school students about responsibility. Now he was telling me 6 years of discipline should simply be repeated because my sister wanted a more expensive wedding. Hannah reached across the table. "I wasn't stealing from you. Then why didn't you ask?" She hesitated. "I didn't think you'd understand." "I understand perfectly." "No, you don't." She shook her head. "You've never cared about weddings. That's true." So this mattered more to me than buying a house mattered to you. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I'd misheard her. "My home mattered less." "You already have an apartment." I almost laughed. "That's your argument. It's temporary. So is your wedding." The words escaped before I could soften them. Silence filled the room. Noah slowly put down his fork. Hannah's face hardened. "That's unfair." "No," I said quietly. "Taking someone else's savings without asking is unfair." Dad rubbed his forehead. Can we stop talking like lawyers? I work in compliance. I know, and facts matter. They're family. They're $18,000. He looked frustrated. Money isn't everything. I never said it was. But trust is. Mom finally spoke. I told Hannah this would become a problem. Everyone turned toward her. Hannah frowned. Mom, you asked me what I thought. Linda looked at me. I told her she needed to talk to you first. You didn't tell me that. I know. Why not? She swallowed. Because your father believed the situation would calm down after the wedding. I looked back at Dad. You expected me to discover my savings were gone and simply wait. We intended to make it right. When no answer. After the honeymoon, still nothing. After I lost the house I planned to buy, Dad looked away. That silence answered every question. Hannah suddenly stood. I have something. She walked into the living room and returned with her phone. I knew you'd make this into a huge issue. She unlocked the screen. So I saved everything. She slid the phone toward me. Text messages. Mine. At least they appeared to be mine. One message read, I always want to help if I can. We'll figure something out. Another, I know how important your wedding is. Dad pointed toward the screen. See, I studied them carefully. At first glance, they looked convincing. Then my professional instincts took over. There were no timestamps, no dates, no complete conversation. Only isolated message bubbles. I looked closer. One sentence ended with a comma. The next began in the middle of an unrelated discussion. Someone had cropped the screen. Deliberately. Hannah. What, show me the full conversation? This is the conversation? No. I slid the phone back. This is a screenshot, so I want the message thread. She hesitated. I deleted some older messages. Convenient. They weren't important. If they weren't important, why remove them? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward Dad. He immediately stepped in. Kayla, don't interrogate your sister. I'm asking for context. You're assuming the worst. I'm noticing missing evidence. Dad's expression tightened. Not everything needs to become an investigation. I almost said Grace's name. I almost mentioned the authentication records. Instead, I stayed quiet. There was no benefit in revealing everything I knew. Not yet. Across the table, Noah cleared his throat. Can I ask something? Everyone looked at him. He turned toward Hannah first. I thought Kayla offered to help pay. Hannah answered immediately. She did. Then Noah looked at me. Did you? I met his eyes. No. He frowned. Hannah told me it was your wedding gift. I never gave one. The color drained from his face. He looked slowly back toward Hannah. You said she insisted. You told me she wanted to surprise us. Honey, you even thanked her in front of my parents. Nobody spoke. For the first time that evening, someone other than me looked genuinely blindsided. Noah leaned back in his chair. I think I'd like to understand what's actually happened. His voice wasn't angry, it was disappointed. There was a huge difference. Dinner ended awkwardly. No one asked about dessert. No one discussed wedding flowers anymore. As guests began leaving, Noah caught up with me in the driveway. Kayla, I turned. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. I think I do. He glanced back toward the house to make sure no one was listening. I have access to the wedding budget. I waited. There are things in it that don't make sense. What kind of things? He lowered his voice. I don't want to accuse anyone until I'm sure. He reached into his jacket and handed me a business card with his cell number written across the back. Can we meet tomorrow morning? I slipped the card into my coat pocket. What are you going to show me? He looked back at the glowing windows of my parents' house before answering. Everything Hannah told me about your money. I barely slept that night. Not because I kept replaying the argument at my parents' house. That part, strangely enough, no longer surprised me. What stayed with me was Noah's face when I said I had never agreed to pay for the wedding. It wasn't the look of someone caught in a lie. It was the look of someone realizing he had been living inside one. We agreed to meet before work at a coffee shop near his office in the West Loop. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting in the back corner with 2 coffees and a laptop. He stood as I approached. "Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. I understand." There was an awkward pause. I don't know exactly what Hannah told you I said, but I'm not here to destroy your relationship. I know. I'm here because $18,000 disappeared. He nodded slowly. And I'm here because I think I was used. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then Noah opened the laptop. "I've handled most of the wedding budget." That surprised me. I thought Hannah was planning everything. She picked almost every detail. I tracked the invoices because that's what I do at work. "What do you do?" "I'm a project manager for a commercial construction company." That explained the spreadsheets. Everything on his screen was organized with tabs, categories, payment dates, vendor contacts, and notes. It looked more like a business proposal than a wedding budget. He clicked on the first sheet. "These are all confirmed vendor payments. Venue, catering, photography, music, flowers, transportation, decorations. The total came to just under $42,000. It was expensive, Noah admitted, but we had a plan." He pointed to another column. "My savings, another. Hannah's savings, then another. Family contributions." I leaned closer. There it was. "Gift from Kayla, $18,000. I stared at the screen without speaking. The words didn't hurt because of the number. They hurt because someone had built an entire financial plan around a lie. "When was this entered?" I asked. He clicked into the history. "About 3 months ago. 3 months. That was months before the money disappeared." So she expected the money before she had it, I guess. No. I looked at him. She planned for it. He slowly nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing." He opened another file. This is what started bothering me. Several payments had green check marks beside them. Others were highlighted yellow. A few were red. "What do the colors mean? Green means paid, yellow outstanding, and red?" He hesitated. "Charges I didn't approve." I felt my stomach tighten again. He clicked the first red line. "Luxury bridal boutique. $3,850. I never saw this invoice." Another. "Designer shoes." Another. "Custom jewelry." Another. "Weekend spa package for 8 bridesmaids." I asked Hannah about these. What did she say? She said her parents surprised her. I almost laughed. My parents don't spend money like that. I know. So I let it go. He rubbed the back of his neck. I shouldn't have. We continued scrolling. Every few minutes, another unexplained expense appeared. Hair extensions, private dance lessons, personal stylist, premium honeymoon upgrades. None of them had been included in the original wedding budget. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. He already knew. I calculated it yesterday. He rotated the screen toward me. $6,247. I blinked. So over $6,000 went somewhere I can't explain. I thought back to the bank records. Exactly $18,000 had disappeared. Yet only part of it had reached legitimate wedding vendors. That meant thousands of dollars had funded something else entirely. Noah opened his email. I didn't know whether to show you this. There were dozens of wedding-related messages, vendor confirmations, contract revisions, payment receipts. Then one subject line caught my attention. Reimbursement confirmation, open that. He clicked. A payment confirmation appeared from the digital payment platform. The amount wasn't large. Just under $800. But the note underneath stopped me cold. Reimbursed from shared family funds. What shared family funds? Noah asked quietly. I have no idea. I leaned closer. The payment reference included the last 4 digits of an account number. My pulse quickened. I know those numbers. He looked at me. They're yours. I nodded. That's my emergency account. He looked genuinely confused. I thought Hannah had her own wedding account. So did I. We sat there in silence. I took out my notebook. At work, whenever something became too complicated to hold in my head, I wrote timelines, not opinions, facts, date, amount, destination, supporting document. I drew 4 columns. Saturday transfer, $18,000, account ending 4271. Then I added every payment Noah had shown me. Patterns began appearing almost immediately. Most legitimate vendors had been paid within days of each other. The unexplained purchases happened later, after the transfer. Almost as if someone had realized there was still money available. I circled 3 dates. These are interesting. What do you see? The spending increased after the transfer cleared. So if she'd already budgeted everything, there shouldn't have been sudden luxury upgrades. Exactly. The upgrades weren't planned. They were enabled. Noah leaned back. I keep asking myself something. What if Hannah believed this was a gift? He looked directly at me. Why did she hide where the money came from? I didn't answer immediately. Because I already suspected the answer. People don't hide gifts. They hide permission. He reached into his messenger bag. I have one more thing. He handed me a folded packet. What is this credit card statements? I looked at the first page. The balances were enormous. Nearly $23,000 spread across several accounts. I looked back up. You knew I knew she had debt. This much? He shook his head. Not until yesterday. The statements showed repeated minimum payments, late fees, interest charges. Several cards were almost maxed out. Then I noticed something unusual. 3 large payments had been made shortly after my money disappeared. These balances dropped. I saw that too. Did you make those payments? No. Did her parents? They couldn't? I looked at him. My parents don't have that kind of cash. He nodded. That's why I started asking questions. A horrible realization settled over me. Not all of my money had paid for a wedding. Some of it had quietly erased Hannah's personal debt. Debt Noah didn't even know existed. He covered his face with one hand. I asked her 3 weeks ago if we were financially ready to get married. What did she say? She told me everything was under control. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, he broke the silence. I don't know who she is right now. I understood that feeling, because I wasn't sure I knew who my own family was anymore. I gathered the copies of the spreadsheets, invoices, and statements into a neat stack. I appreciate you trusting me. I'm not doing this against Hannah. I know. I'm doing it because marriages can't survive secrets like this. I nodded. And families can't survive them either. As we stood to leave, my phone vibrated. It was an email notification. The sender was Melissa Carter. Subject: initial review complete. I opened it immediately. The message was short. Kayla, based on the documents you've already provided, I recommend we meet today. There are legal distinctions you need to understand before speaking with your family again. Also, do not delete any emails, texts, or banking notifications. At this point, preserving evidence is as important as collecting it. I read it twice, then a third time. Noah looked at my expression. Bad news I don't know yet. What is it? I slipped the phone back into my purse. I think this stopped being a family disagreement. He frowned. What is it now? I looked down at the folder filled with spreadsheets, invoices, bank records, and credit card statements. It's becoming a documented financial case. And for the first time since my savings disappeared, I realized facts, not anger, were going to decide how this story ended. Melissa Carter's office occupied the 8th floor of a modern building just north of downtown. The waiting area overlooked Lake Michigan, but I barely noticed the view. I had spent my career reviewing policies, documenting compliance issues, and explaining regulations to department managers. Normally, paperwork made me feel grounded. That morning, the stack of documents in my lap felt heavier than any legal textbook. Melissa greeted me herself. She was in her mid-40s, dressed simply with the kind of steady confidence that came from years of telling clients things they didn't always want to hear. Kayla. Yes. She shook my hand. I'm glad you came before taking any further action. So am I. Once we settled into her office, I spread everything across the conference table. The bank records Grace had printed, the transfer confirmation, the wedding spreadsheets Noah had shared, copies of Hannah's credit card statements, screenshots of her edited text messages. Melissa didn't rush. She read every page, carefully making notes in the margins. After nearly 20 minutes, she closed the folder. The good news, she said, is that you've done exactly what I wish more clients would do. I gave her a puzzled look. I haven't done much. You've documented facts instead of chasing arguments. That sentence alone eased some of the pressure I had been carrying. So where does this leave me? Melissa folded her hands. Let's separate two issues. She held up one finger, authority, then another. Consent. They aren't the same. Exactly. She reached for the original account agreement. Your father was still an authorized signer. That means the bank was legally permitted to process certain requests involving the account. So everyone keeps telling me. But authority doesn't automatically answer whether someone exceeded the purpose for which that authority existed. I leaned forward. What does that mean in plain English? She smiled. It means having the keys to someone's house doesn't give you permission to sell their furniture. I couldn't help smiling. That's a much better explanation. It's also one judges understand. She slid another document toward me. Now let's talk about your sister. Melissa highlighted several dates. 3 months before the transfer, Hannah's wedding budget already listed an $18,000 contribution from you, even though I never agreed. Correct. Is that important? It's extremely important. She tapped the spreadsheet. It suggests expectation. Then she tapped the bank records. This suggests execution. Finally, she pointed to the spending timeline. And this suggests benefit. I understood immediately. Planning, transfer, spending. The sequence mattered. It wasn't spontaneous, I said quietly. No. Melissa nodded. If these records are accurate, someone built a financial plan assuming your money would become available. That realization somehow hurt more than the transfer itself. This hadn't been a desperate decision made in the middle of wedding planning. It had been incorporated into the budget months in advance. I thought back to Hannah telling me she borrowed the money. People don't accidentally budget borrowed money months before they receive it. Melissa continued. I also noticed something else. She held up Hannah's screenshots. These concern me. Because they're edited, because they appear intentionally incomplete. She enlarged one image on her computer. The timestamps are missing. I noticed. The conversation history is missing. Yes. And the cropped edges suggest portions were removed. So they wouldn't hold much weight. They would raise questions. I nodded slowly. For the first time all week, I felt as though reality was catching up with the story my family had been telling. Melissa opened a legal pad. Let's build a timeline. I appreciated that. Timelines don't argue, they simply exist. We started from the beginning, 9 years ago. Emergency account created. Richard added as an authorized signer after Linda's surgery. 6 years ago. I began saving for a home. 3 months ago, Wedding spreadsheet listed an $18,000 contribution that I had never promised. 4 days before the transfer. Unknown logins appeared. Transfer day. Money moved. 30 minutes later, Hannah posted photos celebrating new wedding deposits. Following week, luxury purchases increased. Several credit card balances were paid down. Family dinner. Hannah claimed it was a loan. Richard insisted family shouldn't keep score. Noah revealed he had been told the money was my gift. Melissa underlined the final entry. Notice something. The lies keep changing. Exactly. She looked directly at me. Truth usually stays consistent. That sentence lingered in the room, because every new conversation seemed to produce a different explanation. Gift, loan, family support, temporary help. No one could settle on a single version. Melissa closed the notebook. I don't think you should contact Hannah again. I wasn't planning to. I also don't think you should respond if she contacts you emotionally. I can do that. Everything from this point forward should be documented. She handed me another folder. Inside were sample preservation notices. What are these formal requests instructing people not to destroy potentially relevant evidence? I frowned. Emails. Texts. Bank notifications, those too. I looked at the documents. So this isn't accusing anyone. No, it's simply saying, don't delete anything. Melissa nodded. Exactly. I appreciated the distinction. She wasn't escalating the conflict. She was protecting the facts. Will people get angry? Probably. I don't want to destroy my family. Melissa leaned back. Kayla asking people to preserve evidence doesn't destroy families. She paused. The decisions that made the evidence necessary usually do. I sat quietly. No one had said anything that honest to me in weeks. She reached for another page. I'd also like you to stop discussing details with your father. I hesitated. Why, if Richard truly believed he was helping Hannah, he may eventually realize the legal implications of what happened. And people sometimes remember events differently once they recognize potential consequences. I understood exactly what she meant. Not because people always lied, sometimes because they genuinely tried to protect themselves. Grace mentioned additional authentication records. Melissa nodded. I spoke with her this morning. That surprised me. You did with your written authorization, yes. What did she say? Only that more technical information is coming. Will it matter? I believe so. She looked thoughtful. Right now we know someone used the account. We know my father didn't complete the online transfer himself. Correct. What we don't yet know is who controlled every authentication step. I remembered Grace mentioning device history, verification paths, metadata. Words that usually sounded technical, now they sounded personal. Melissa stood and walked toward the window. If those records confirm what I suspect... She stopped speaking. What? Your case becomes much stronger. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because evidence was beginning to support what I already believed. Sadness because every new fact moved me farther away from the family I thought I had. As our meeting ended, Melissa handed me a checklist. Your priorities. I glanced down. Preserve documents. Avoid emotional discussions. Continue gathering records. Do not alter electronic evidence. Document future communications. Simple. Practical. Calm. Exactly what I needed. When I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Hannah. I can't believe you're turning this into a legal issue. Dad says you're humiliating the family. A second message arrived almost immediately. Please stop before you ruin my wedding. I read both messages twice. Then I took screenshots, saved them in a folder labeled Evidence, and locked my phone without replying. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I realized something important. Silence wasn't weakness. Sometimes silence was documentation. As I reached my car, another notification appeared. This one was from Grace. Additional authentication records received. Please contact me as soon as possible. I stared at the message for a long moment. Whatever those records contained, they were important enough for Grace to reach out immediately. And something told me they were finally going to answer the one question everyone had been avoiding. Who had actually been holding the phone when my $18,000 disappeared 2 weeks before Hannah's wedding? The first crack appeared where no one expected it. It wasn't a dramatic argument. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't even another conversation with me. It was an email from the wedding venue. I only learned about it because Noah forwarded it. Subject: outstanding balance confirmation required. The venue manager explained that several recent payments had come from different funding sources. Before finalizing the event schedule, they needed written confirmation that the remaining balance would be paid according to the contract. Noah added a single sentence above the forwarded email. This doesn't match what Hannah told me. I read it twice before calling him. He answered on the first ring. Did she see the email? Yes. What did she say? That the venue made a bookkeeping mistake. And you believed her? I wanted to. His honesty had become one of the few stable things in this entire situation. When can we meet this evening? That works. After work, we met at a quiet park instead of a coffee shop. Neither of us wanted another public conversation. Noah looked exhausted. Dark circles had formed under his eyes, and the easy confidence I'd seen at the engagement party months earlier had disappeared. He handed me another folder. I started asking vendors for copies of every invoice. Did Hannah know? Not at first. What happened when she found out? He laughed bitterly. She accused me of acting like an auditor instead of a fiancé. I understood that feeling all too well. He opened the folder. The florist. The invoice showed one amount. The payment confirmation showed another. Why are they different? The florist told me Hannah upgraded everything 3 days after signing the contract. How much? Almost $3,000. Another document. The photographer. Another upgrade. Premium package. Additional hours. Drone footage. Luxury wedding album. Another $1,800. Then the transportation company. Instead of one limousine, Hannah had upgraded to a fleet of luxury SUVs. Another unexpected expense. Each document told the same story. The wedding hadn't simply become expensive. It had become progressively more extravagant after my savings disappeared. I looked at the dates. Every upgrade occurred after the transfer from my account, exactly as I'd suspected. Noah watched me studying the timeline. You see it too. I do. This wasn't poor budgeting. No, it was expanding because new money became available. He nodded slowly. I keep wondering how long this would have continued if nobody had questioned anything. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. It was another message from Hannah. Dad says you still haven't dropped this. Then another. Do you really want to be responsible for ruining my wedding? I showed the screen to Noah. He sighed. She keeps saying the same thing to me. What if the wedding falls apart? It'll be because people stop supporting us. I locked my phone again. No, I said it more to myself than to him. It'll fall apart because it was built on assumptions that never should have existed. The following afternoon, I received a voicemail from my father. His voice sounded unusually tired. Kayla, call me when you can. No accusations, no lectures, just a request. I waited until after work before returning the call. He answered almost immediately. I'm glad you called. What did you want to talk about? There was a long pause. I met with Hannah today, and she's under a lot of stress. I closed my eyes. We're still talking about her stress. I'm trying to help. Dad, helping isn't the same as pretending nothing happened. I know. The words surprised me. You know, I know things have gotten bigger than I expected. That was the closest thing to an admission I'd heard from him.
What exactly did you expect I thought?
He hesitated.
I thought Hannah would use the account, have the wedding, then repay you before you ever needed the money.
I gripped the phone tighter. You approved that I approved her using the account.
You approved taking $18,000 without asking me. I didn't know the amount.
His answer stopped me.
You didn't know. Then what did you think you were authorizing? Hannah said she needed temporary access to move some wedding funds.
I felt my stomach sink. You never asked how much I trusted her, and you never called me I believed she'd already spoken to you. I leaned against my kitchen counter. For the first time, I wasn't hearing a father defending one daughter over another. I was hearing a man beginning to understand that he'd been manipulated. Dad,
I know what you're going to say. I don't think you do. No.
His voice cracked slightly.
I should have called you first.
Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he said quietly, I honestly thought I was helping both of my daughters. I believed him. That didn't erase what had happened, but it explained something I'd struggled to understand. Richard Bishop hadn't acted out of greed. He had acted out of misplaced trust and a lifelong habit of rescuing Hannah before asking difficult questions. The damage, however, was exactly the same. 2 days later, Grace called. I've received another portion of the banking records. Did they answer anything? They answered part of it. What part the transaction path? I grabbed my notebook. I'm listening.
The account wasn't accessed from your father's usual device. I know.
We've now confirmed the security verification process involved multiple authentication steps, meaning someone had physical possession of a smartphone throughout the transaction. And my father, he participated in one verification. My heart skipped. One yes. She chose her words carefully. From what we can currently reconstruct, your father appears to have provided a verification code, but he didn't complete the remaining steps.
Correct. What does that mean?
It means another person controlled almost the entire transaction.
I wrote every word down.
Can you identify who? Not yet. She paused.
But we're very close.
Saturday morning, Mom called. That alone was unusual. She rarely phoned me unless Dad was unavailable. Hi, Mom. Can you come over? I don't think that's a good idea. It isn't for dinner. What is it? I need to show you something. Her voice sounded different, not frightened. Resolved. I found something while cleaning the office. What I don't want to discuss it over the phone. I hesitated. Does Dad know? No, Hannah, no. What did you find? Another pause. Then she answered softly. A notebook. A notebook. When your father never knew Hannah borrowed. I looked at the clock. I'll be there in 30 minutes. As I picked up my keys, Grace's earlier words echoed in my mind. Another person controlled almost the entire transaction. And for the first time since this began, it felt like every piece of evidence was slowly moving toward the same unavoidable conclusion. Someone hadn't simply taken my savings. Someone had planned exactly how to do it. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, I wasn't expecting a miracle. I was expecting another piece of evidence. Nothing more, nothing less. Mom opened the front door before I knocked. She looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. I made coffee, she said. I don't think either of us is going to drink it. A faint, sad smile crossed her face. Probably not. She led me into Dad's small home office. I'd spent countless afternoons there growing up. It was where he graded papers when he was still teaching. The bookshelves were lined with history textbooks, framed family photos, and boxes of old financial records he never seemed willing to throw away. A spiral notebook sat on the desk. Mom gently pushed it toward me. Hannah borrowed this several months ago. I looked at the cover. Dad's handwriting, household accounts.
I found it behind a filing cabinet while I was looking for your father's tax records. What is it he used it whenever he needed help remembering passwords or account information? I immediately looked up. You mean, I don't know exactly what's inside? My pulse quickened as I opened the notebook. Most pages contained ordinary things. Utility account numbers, insurance policy reminders, medication schedules. Nothing unusual. Then, halfway through the notebook, I found a page with several banking notes. Emergency account. Primary owner Kayla. Authorized signer Richard. Security questions. I felt my stomach tighten. The answers weren't complete passwords. The notebook didn't contain anything illegal by itself, but it listed enough personal information that someone familiar with online banking could move through several identity verification screens much faster. I looked at Mom. Did Dad know Hannah had this? She shook her head. He forgot she'd borrowed it. When maybe 4 months ago. That matched the timeline almost perfectly. Did she ever return it? I honestly don't remember. I carefully photographed every page before placing the notebook exactly where I had found it. I'd like Melissa to review this. I thought you might. Mom looked down at her hands. I should have spoken up sooner. I sat beside her. Why didn't you? She took a long breath. Because for years, keeping the peace felt easier than starting another argument. I understood. I'd watched that pattern my entire life. Whenever Hannah made another impulsive decision, everyone adjusted around her instead of asking her to change. No one intended to create entitlement. They simply postponed uncomfortable conversations until those conversations became impossible to avoid. Unfortunately, I had become the one expected to absorb the cost. Before leaving, I asked one question that had been bothering me for days. Mom, did you know Dad approved the transfer? She nodded slowly. I knew he thought he was helping. And you? I told him he needed to call you first. What did he say? He said there wasn't enough time. I closed my eyes. There had always been enough time to ask. There simply hadn't been enough willingness. An hour later, I met Melissa at her office. She examined the notebook without touching it directly. You photographed everything before moving it. Yes. Good. She placed the notebook inside an evidence sleeve. This doesn't prove someone committed fraud. I know, but it helps explain how someone may have answered security questions. She nodded. Exactly. At that moment, my phone rang. Grace. I answered immediately. Hi, Grace. I've received the final authentication records. Melissa quietly picked up a legal pad. Can you come to the bank? We're on our way. Grace was waiting for us in the same conference room where we'd first met. This time there were no introductory explanations. No background, only documents. She connected her laptop to a larger monitor. I'll keep this as simple as possible. I appreciated that. She displayed a timeline. Saturday, 10:57 a.m. Account login initiated. 11:02 a.m. Identity verification completed. 7:06 a.m. Multi-factor authentication requested. 11:09 a.m. Verification code entered. 11:18 a.m. Transfer completed. Grace pointed to the first entry. The initial login came from an iPhone. She clicked again. We've now confirmed that device had never previously accessed your father's online banking profile. So it wasn't his phone. Correct. Another click. The verification code was sent to your father's registered phone. I looked at Melissa. So Dad received the code. Yes. Grace continued. The code was entered less than 30 seconds later. Dad wasn't that fast with technology. Even sending a text message took him longer than that. Grace seemed to know exactly what I was thinking. We also reviewed the customer service recording made 2 days after the transfer. There was a recording. There always is when customers discuss account activity. She played a short excerpt. Dad's voice filled the room. My daughter is helping her sister with wedding expenses. I was told everything had already been discussed. He sounded completely sincere. Then Grace paused the recording. What matters isn't only what he said. She opened another report. Our technical team compared device information from previous online sessions. My breathing slowed. I knew something important was coming. The phone completing nearly every step of the transaction matches another device already associated with this customer profile. Whose Grace looked directly at me. Hannah Bishop's. The room became completely silent. Even though I'd suspected it for days, hearing it stated so plainly felt different. Melissa asked the next question. How certain are you? Grace slid a certified report across the table. Device fingerprint. Another page. Operating system match. Another. Authentication token history. Another. IP consistency. Everything pointed in one direction. Grace summarized it in one sentence. Your father supplied one verification code because he believed he was authorizing temporary account access. She paused. Every other meaningful step in the transaction was completed from Hannah's phone. I looked down at the report. There it was. Not speculation, not assumptions. Documented evidence. Melissa slowly closed the folder. This answers the central question. It does, yes. She looked at me. We can now distinguish between your father's mistake and Hannah's actions. Those words mattered more than I expected. For weeks, everyone had been treated as one united story. Now the evidence separated intention from execution. Dad had exercised terrible judgment. Hannah had controlled the transaction. Melissa turned to Grace. Will the bank certify these records if necessary? Yes. And the authentication logs, yes. The customer service recording, yes. Grace nodded. Everything has been preserved. Melissa looked at me. I believe we're ready. For what? She removed a prepared document from her briefcase. Across the top in bold letters it read, Formal civil demand for repayment. We're not filing a lawsuit today, she said calmly. We're giving Hannah one opportunity to resolve this before litigation becomes necessary. I stared at the document. For weeks, I'd imagined justice as something loud. A courtroom, an argument. Someone finally admitting I was right. Instead, justice looked surprisingly quiet. A carefully organized binder, certified records, chronological timelines, professional language, no shouting, no revenge, just facts. As we stood to leave, my phone vibrated. A new message from Hannah appeared. Dad says the bank keeps asking questions. What exactly have you been telling them? I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I handed the phone to Melissa. She read the message once before giving it back. Don't answer. I wasn't planning to. She smiled. Good. Outside the bank, the afternoon sun reflected off the river. For the first time since my savings disappeared, I wasn't wondering whether anyone would believe me. The evidence already spoke for itself. Now all that remained was seeing whether Hannah would finally accept responsibility or force everyone into the next step. Melissa sent the formal civil demand by certified mail the next morning, not to embarrass Hannah, not to frighten her, simply to create a clear legal record. The letter gave her 14 days to respond. It included no dramatic accusations, only dates, documents, transaction summaries, authentication records, copies of the wedding budget showing the fictional gift from Kayla, a timeline of the transfers, and a request for repayment before litigation became necessary. 3 days later, Melissa called. They've retained an attorney. I set my coffee down. Does that mean they're fighting it? Not necessarily. What does it mean? It means they're taking it seriously. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Not because lawyers were involved,
because facts had finally replaced family arguments. Melissa continued. Their attorney requested mediation. When next Tuesday, I agreed immediately. I wasn't interested in revenge. If this could end without a courtroom, I wanted that opportunity. The mediation office looked nothing like television. No judge, no witness stand. Just a long conference table inside a quiet office building. The mediator introduced himself, explained the rules, and reminded everyone that the goal was resolution rather than victory. On one side of the table sat Melissa and me. Across from us sat Hannah, her attorney Richard, Linda, and Noah. It was the first time I'd seen Hannah in nearly a month. She looked exhausted. The confidence she'd worn at family dinner had disappeared. Her wedding ring wasn't on her finger. I noticed before anyone spoke. Apparently Noah had stopped wearing his engagement ring too. The mediator began. We'll review the documentation first. Melissa handed over 3 organized binders. 1 for the mediator, 1 for opposing counsel, 1 for Hannah, no speeches, no dramatic presentation, just evidence. The mediator spent several minutes reading silently. Finally, he looked toward Hannah. Your budget identifies an $18,000 contribution from your sister approximately 3 months before the transfer occurred. Yes. When did your sister agree to provide those funds? Hannah hesitated. I understood that she would. Melissa remained silent. The mediator looked up again. My question wasn't what you believed. He spoke calmly. It was when she agreed. Another pause. I don't remember. The mediator made a note. He moved to the next document, the authentication records. Grace had prepared a certification package for exactly this purpose. The mediator reviewed the summary. Then he turned toward Richard. Mr. Bishop? Yes. Did you personally complete this online transfer? Richard looked down. No. Did you believe you were authorizing your daughter to permanently transfer $18,000? No. What did you believe? Richard swallowed. I believed she needed temporary access to move wedding funds. The room became very quiet. The mediator nodded. So you were mistaken? Yes. Richard didn't try to defend himself. I should have called Kayla. You should have. It was the first time I'd ever heard another adult say those words to my father. He didn't argue. He simply nodded again. Melissa then presented the next section, the wedding spreadsheets, vendor invoices, luxury upgrades, credit card payments. The mediator compared the dates carefully. Several $1,000s from these transferred funds never reached wedding vendors, Melissa answered. Correct. They reduced personal debt. Correct. He turned toward Hannah. Is that accurate? She looked at her attorney. Her attorney looked back at her. Finally, she answered. Some of it paid credit cards. Why? They were wedding expenses. Melissa quietly slid another document across the table. It includes clothing purchases from 2 years before the engagement. Hannah didn't respond. Another statement. Spa charges, vacation expenses, designer handbags, none had anything to do with the wedding. The silence grew heavier. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. Noah asked if he could speak. The mediator nodded. He took a deep breath before looking directly at Hannah. I defended you. She didn't answer. I defended you to my parents. Still nothing. I defended you to Kayla. His voice wasn't angry. It was heartbroken. You told me she wanted to surprise us? He looked toward me. I thanked her, then back to Hannah. You let me thank someone who didn't even know her money was gone. Tears filled Hannah's eyes. I'm sorry. Noah slowly shook his head. I don't think you're sorry because you did it. Another long pause. I think you're sorry because it didn't stay hidden. No one interrupted him. He reached into his jacket pocket. I brought something. He placed a small velvet ring box on the table. Every person in the room stared at it. He opened the box. The engagement ring rested inside. I can't marry someone I don't trust. Hannah began crying.
Please don't do this. I didn't end this relationship today.
His voice remained steady. It ended the day honesty stopped mattering. He closed the box. I just didn't know it yet. The mediator quietly called for a short break. When we returned 15 minutes later, the atmosphere had completely changed. The arguments were gone. The evidence had done its job. Hannah's attorney leaned toward her. They spoke privately for several minutes. Finally, he addressed the room.
My client wishes to discuss settlement.
Melissa nodded. We're listening. The proposal took almost 2 hours to negotiate. Every number was documented, every deadline written clearly. The final agreement included full repayment of the $18,000, reimbursement of legal costs, a structured payment schedule, automatic enforcement provisions if payment stopped, no admission of criminal liability, civil resolution only. Melissa reviewed every paragraph carefully before sliding the agreement toward me. You don't have to accept. I read every page. It wasn't perfect. Nothing could undo what had happened. Nothing could give me back the months of stress.
Nothing could erase discovering my savings account nearly empty.
But it accomplished something important. It required accountability, without humiliation, without revenge, without pretending nothing had happened. I signed. Hannah signed a few minutes later. As the mediator collected the documents, Mom quietly walked over to me. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me this today. I do. Her eyes filled with tears. I kept hoping someone else would fix this. I hugged her. I know. She whispered something I'll never forget. Keeping peace isn't the same as protecting your family.
No!
I squeezed her hand gently. Sometimes protecting your family means telling them they're wrong. She nodded through her tears. Across the room, Richard remained seated. He hadn't moved in several minutes. He simply stared at the signed repayment agreement. The phrase he'd repeated my entire life, family doesn't keep score, had finally met something stronger. Documentation, accountability, truth. And none of those things had destroyed our family. The decisions that required them had. The first repayment arrived exactly 30 days after the mediation.
It wasn't a dramatic amount. Just under $1,500.
The bank notification appeared on my phone while I was reviewing quarterly compliance reports at work. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Months earlier, seeing money move into my account would have filled me with relief. This time it mostly made me sad. Not because I didn't want the money back. I did. Every dollar represented years of skipped vacations, packed lunches, overtime shifts, and saying no to things I wanted so I could say yes to my future. What made me sad was knowing that none of it should have required lawyers, investigators, and a mediation room. It should have required one honest conversation. I archived the notification in the folder labeled Settlement Payments and went back to work. That simple act surprised me. I wasn't checking my balance every hour anymore. I wasn't rereading the authentication reports. I wasn't trying to convince myself that I hadn't imagined everything. The evidence had already done that. Now I was simply moving forward. Over the next 4 months, the payments continued. Always on time, always exactly as required by the agreement. Melissa emailed me after the 4th installment. Everything is proceeding according to schedule. Unless something changes, I don't anticipate any enforcement issues. I thanked her and closed the email. For the first time in nearly half a year, there wasn't another document waiting to be reviewed. No new evidence, no contradictory story, no emergency meeting, just life. I hadn't realized how exhausting constant vigilance had become until I no longer needed it. Around the same time, my mortgage lender called.
Ms. Bishop, this is Kayla. I have good news.
I smiled before he even continued.
Your updated financial documentation has been approved. I leaned back in my chair. So we're moving forward. We are. The repayments combined with the additional savings I'd continued to build throughout the legal process were enough. The missing money had delayed my plans. It hadn't destroyed them. 3 weeks later, I stood inside a title company's conference room, signing the final stack of closing documents. The room smelled faintly of fresh paper and coffee. The escrow officer slid another form toward me. Initial here. I laughed. I've never signed my name this many times. That's homeownership. When I finally received the keys, they felt surprisingly ordinary. No dramatic music, no applause. Just a small metal ring with 2 silver keys. Yet, I knew those keys represented something much bigger than a house. No one had given them to me. No one had sacrificed for me. No one had rescued me. I'd earned them. Twice. Once by saving the money. Again, by refusing to let someone convince me I didn't deserve it. Evan met me at the house that evening. He'd seen it only once during the inspection. Now it was officially mine. He walked through the front door carrying pizza and a toolbox. You bought the house. I did. You realize the first official homeowner purchase should probably be a couch. I was thinking smoke detectors. He laughed. That's exactly why I love you. We ate dinner sitting on the living room floor because there wasn't any furniture yet. Sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors. The house wasn't huge. 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, an old maple tree that probably needed trimming. It was perfect. Not because it impressed anyone, because it represented stability. After dinner, Evan looked around the empty room. Can I ask you something? Of course. If none of this had happened. He paused carefully. Would you still have bought this house? I think so. And if Hannah called tomorrow asking for forgiveness? I thought about the question much longer than he probably expected. I could forgive her, but I wouldn't give her access to my finances. He nodded. What about your parents? That's different. How my father made a terrible decision, and he also accepted responsibility. Evan didn't interrupt. He stopped defending what happened. He apologized. He signed a statement supporting the settlement. I looked out the front window. Trust isn't either completely broken or completely restored. It's rebuilt. If both people are willing. A week after moving in, my parents asked if they could visit. Not to celebrate, just to talk. I invited them over on Sunday afternoon. Mom brought homemade cookies. Dad carried a small toolbox. I figured every new homeowner needs one. I smiled. Thank you. For a while we talked about ordinary things, the neighborhood, paint colors, landscaping. It almost felt normal. Eventually Dad set down his coffee. I owe you something. You already apologized. I know. This is different. He reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a handwritten letter. I wrote this because every time I tried saying it out loud, I kept getting it wrong. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. Kayla. His voice was unsteady. I spent so many years believing that keeping our family together meant smoothing over conflict before anyone got hurt. He paused. I never realized that avoiding one person's pain often meant placing it on someone else. I looked down at my hands. When Hannah came to me, I wanted to fix her problem. I didn't stop to ask whether it was mine to fix. Another pause. I also didn't stop to ask what it would cost you. The room remained completely silent. I've repeated the phrase, his family doesn't keep score for most of your life. A faint smile crossed his face. I thought it sounded generous. He looked directly at me. I understand now that I was asking one child to keep paying while another never learned the cost. Tears filled my eyes before I realized they were there. He folded the letter. I can't change what happened. No. But I can promise I won't confuse peacekeeping with fairness again. I believed him. Not because of the words, because of everything he'd done since mediation. He had stopped making excuses. He had stopped asking me to let it go. He had respected every boundary I set. That mattered more than any speech. Before leaving, he handed me the toolbox. I almost forgot. Inside, tucked beneath the screwdrivers and measuring tape, was a small framed photograph. It showed me at 12 years old standing beside him while we built a birdhouse in the backyard. On the back, he'd written one sentence. "Thank you for teaching your father that integrity must be practiced at home before it can be preached anywhere else." I held the frame for a long time after they left, not because everything had been repaired. Some things never returned to what they were, but because healing had finally stopped depending on someone else admitting I was right. It depended on me choosing what kind of relationships I was willing to carry into the future. As I placed the photo on the mantle, my phone buzzed with one final notification. Settlement payment received. Exactly on schedule, exactly as promised. For the first time, I smiled before opening it. Not because of the money, because it represented something far more valuable. Accountability had finally become a habit instead of an argument. By the time autumn arrived, my new house finally felt like a home. The moving boxes had disappeared, the walls were painted, the bookshelves were full. The maple tree in the backyard had turned shades of red and gold dropping leaves across the patio every morning. I didn't mind sweeping them away. There was something comforting about taking care of a place that belonged to me. Not because it was expensive, not because anyone envied it. Because every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every repair was my responsibility. And after everything that had happened, responsibility no longer felt like a burden. It felt like freedom. Evan was helping me arrange folding chairs in the backyard for a small housewarming gathering. Nothing elaborate. A few close friends, neighbors I'd gotten to know. My parents, no caterers, no extravagant decorations, just homemade food music playing softly from a portable speaker and people who genuinely wanted to celebrate a new beginning. "You nervous?" Evan asked. "A little. Because your parents are coming." I nodded. "And because this feels like the first family gathering where I actually know what my boundaries are." He smiled. "That's a good kind of nervous." "I think so too." A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. My parents were the first to arrive. Mom carried a homemade apple pie. Dad held a small potted maple sapling. I thought he said with an awkward smile, "Every new home deserves another tree." I laughed softly. "I love it." He looked relieved. Not because I'd accepted the gift, because I'd accepted the gesture. There was a difference. Throughout the afternoon, conversations flowed naturally. Nobody mentioned lawsuits. Nobody mentioned mediation. Nobody pretended the past had never happened. Instead, we talked about work neighborhood restaurants, home improvement projects, and whether Chicago winters were ever going to become easier. They weren't. Everyone agreed on that. At one point, Mom wandered through the house with me. She stopped in the second bedroom. "Office," I nodded. "I work from home 2 days a week." She smiled. "It suits you. What does building something that's yours?" There was no hidden meaning behind her words. Just quiet admiration. It was the healthiest conversation we'd had in years. Later that afternoon, Dad asked if we could sit on the back patio for a few minutes. Just the two of us. The guests continued talking inside while we stepped outdoors. The maple leaves rustled gently above us. Dad looked around the yard before speaking. "I've been thinking about something. What is it I spent months apologizing? You did. But apologies aren't the same as understanding." I waited. "I finally understand why you didn't simply forgive everyone and move on." I looked at him carefully. "What do you think the reason was?" He smiled sadly. "Because forgiveness never required you to pretend your boundaries didn't matter. Exactly.
He had finally said it without my having to explain. I used to believe he continued that once someone apologized, everything should go back to the way it was. And now I think trust deserves the same effort it takes to rebuild a house after a fire. He looked toward my home.
You don't move back inside while it's still unsafe.
His words surprised me, not because they were profound, because they showed genuine growth. For years, he'd asked me to ignore damage in the name of keeping peace. Now he understood why rebuilding required time, honesty, and consistent actions. I don't expect everything to be the same, he said quietly. I know, but I hope someday we keep building. I reached over and squeezed his hand. We already are. There were no dramatic hugs, no tearful speeches, just two adults acknowledging that relationships survive not because difficult things never happen, but because people eventually choose honesty over comfort. As the afternoon came to an end, guests slowly began leaving. Mom hugged me tightly before getting into the car. Dad carefully placed the maple sapling near the fence where I'd decided to plant it later. Then he paused. I should tell you something. What? Hannah asked whether she could come today. That surprised me. I didn't know. I told her it wasn't my invitation to give. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. What did she say? She said she understood. I thought about that for a moment. Is she still making the payments every month? Good. She's also seeing a financial counselor. That was the first news I'd heard about Hannah in weeks. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel resentment. I simply hoped she meant it. Not for my sake. For hers. People who never learn accountability usually repeat the same mistakes with different victims. Maybe she was finally breaking that pattern. Maybe not. That choice belonged to her now. Mine had already been made. That evening after everyone left, Evan and I sat on the back steps watching the sunset. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. So, do you finally feel like this chapter is over? I looked around my backyard, the quiet street, the porch light glowing against the evening sky, the house I'd once believed I'd lost forever. Then I thought about the frightened woman who had stared at a nearly empty savings account months earlier, convinced everything she'd worked for had disappeared. She hadn't known that evidence would matter more than anger. She hadn't known that patience would be stronger than shouting. She hadn't known that justice could arrive quietly inside organized folders, certified records, and carefully chosen boundaries. Most of all, she hadn't known that healing would begin the moment she stopped trying to convince everyone else she deserved fairness. I don't think it's the end of the story, I finally said. Evan smiled. What is it then? It's the beginning of a healthier one. He kissed my forehead. I like that ending. So do I. I stood and walked toward the young maple tree waiting to be planted. Its roots were wrapped carefully, protected, until it was placed somewhere permanent. For some reason that felt familiar. I'd spent years believing family meant giving people unlimited access to my time, my money, and my heart. Now I understood something very different. Real love isn't measured by how much you're willing to lose for someone. It's measured by the respect both people are willing to protect. And that was worth far more than $18,000. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people we trust so completely that we never imagine locking a door, questioning a decision, or protecting ourselves. If you've ever been told that setting boundaries makes you selfish, I hope this story reminds you that healthy boundaries don't destroy families. They reveal whether relationships are built on respect or on access. Forgiveness can be a beautiful choice, but forgiveness and unrestricted trust are not the same thing. You can wish someone well while still protecting your peace. You can love your family without financing their mistakes, and you can choose compassion without sacrificing your future. justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like patiently collecting facts, refusing to argue with manipulation, and allowing truth to speak through evidence instead of emotion. Healing begins the moment you stop trying to earn fairness from people who have already decided you owe them more than they are willing to give you. Your value is not measured by how much you can endure or how much you can give away. It is measured by your integrity, your self-respect, and the courage to protect both. If this story resonated with you, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you loved? Share your experience or perspective in the comments. You never know who might find comfort in your words. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about family resilience, justice, and healing, please subscribe to the channel and join us for more journeys like this. Thank you for watching. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.